Now, I have to admit, I have mixed feelings about this as an English minor.
I'll start singing and everybody will immediately unsubscribe.
I can take any topic and convert it to a podcast or some other form of audio briefing and just listen to it while I'm doing something else.
Hey, David. Welcome back.
Hey, hey, Peter, good to be back. Welcome back to
Yes.
Call Me Data.
Yeah, welcome back. It's another week has flown by. I don't know where the time goes. And yeah, we have wait, is this another Aloha shirt?
These are ukuleles.
I like
So I
that.
guess, thank you. Thank you. I forgot to bring my ukulele up from the basement, or I would play you a little song, but maybe next time, or maybe not. Um, hey,
You play you I'll start singing and everybody will immediately unsubscribe. Um,
that could be scary.
yes,
But
I promise you it will
before
be.
you unsubscribe, today actually is a really interesting topic. This is one I've been looking forward to.
Yeah.
The changing interface and how human and machine interaction changes with AI, which is really interesting.
No, this is super interesting, and this is something that I think you and I, when we first embarked on this venture way back when, we kind of had a conversation about it a little bit, and we might have even written something about it on a Substack or something. I vaguely have some recollection of that, and we never really spoke about it after that. But I think it's one of those things that really kind of goes unspoken about, and it's the recognition, or I think you should be aware of how things and how you interact with a machine is going to dramatically change because of artificial intelligence. And I
Yeah.
think
Now,
that
you're
is
not
super
saying I have to
important.
get rid of my keyboard, are you?
Well, not yet, at least. I think in due time,
Okay.
probably yes. You might buy a microphone instead. No, I think there's just a matter of time, though, before we will be we'll be doing that. We're going to have to. I just things are changing and they're changing so fast. It's a natural, and it's much more natural for us humans to communicate that way than sitting and henpecking on a keyboard.
Well, so obviously you're referring to voice, which I think is probably, the first thing we'll talk about, and it's probably the most noticeable change. But there's also interesting changes to me just in terms of even when we're typing, what are we typing, right? Like it used to be if you wanted to develop software, you were communicating through a very structured, very rigid coding language. And we know that isn't the case anymore. So I think whether you're talking voice, video, good old hands on keyboard, there's a lot of changes in how we interact with machines and how we get data back and signal back.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't look, the technology is obviously very nascent. And, right now, most of us are not, some more so than others are used to talking to, say, Siri and, speaking to their messages. But that's different than how you interact with a computer or a device per se. Moving away from, either on a phone using your thumbs or your fingers to actually having a device where potentially you don't need those icons and you're just straight communicating with this device using natural language, much like you and I speak right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it has a little bit of a Star Trek ring to it, right? Which is, I just want to
Very much.
give commands, voice commands to the all seeing, all powerful computer on my desk or in my hand and have it do what I want.
Hey,
Um,
Hal's here in small form
yeah.
factor. It's
So,
just about
but it is funny because I've spent more time in the last 2 months with my AirPods in my ears than not listening to music, just doing work.
yeah.
Because as you're saying, I find that I'm constantly finding scenarios in which just speaking out loud is faster and honestly lets me get into more of a creative groove when I'm trying to write a deliverable or a proposal or an article or whatever. It's just easier than having to type. And I'm a pretty good typer, but this is
Right.
easier.
Well, you said something that's I want to capture that for a second. I think why it's different cognitively, and it's important because when you and I sit and write a document, we're sitting there, we're thinking about how to structure that document, the content that we want to see in that document, how we articulate the point of view that we're trying to get across in a document. Like if you're writing an email or you're writing a proposal, or you're writing, you know, the output of analysis you spent months working on, we're sitting there and we're thinking about what we want to do. Yet when I use the models, I do it very differently. I don't go through that. Not that I don't think, I obviously think a lot, but I do it differently. It's much more of a stream of conscious that comes out that I might just speak into one of these apps, and it will take all my information, it'll transcribe it, and then I'll say, now organize it for me. It's a very
Yes.
different approach.
Massively different. I think you just hit on a very, very key point. It is. when I'm writing, I am simultaneously translating thoughts to words, and I'm thinking about how to express them. I'm thinking about how to connect sentences together, and I'm thinking about the overall structure of the document. It's a lot to juggle. And you and I've both been doing a lot of this. When I'm talking to an AI model, I'm storytelling. I'm using my own words,
Yes.
and I'm
Yeah.
not thinking about the structure, the organization. I'm not even thinking about the exact sentences. I'm just storytelling. And then I rely on tools to help organize my story into something that makes more sense.
Now, what I find about this approach, which I love, is that much more of my cognitive capacity, which is limited at my age anyway, is used to doing actual thought work. It's used to doing actual thought work. And I'm not getting bogged down by, oh, well, I got to actually, it's one single line space, or it's this, or it's that, which sounds stupid, but when you're writing a document, it takes up a decent amount of your brain. But I can riff on things in my head. I actually get much more creative than I otherwise would.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And it sort of frees you to focus on the message and the content, not the grammatical structure or the narrative
Right.
flow, because it's just easier to go back and with some AI assistance, take your thoughts and arrange them later and worry about the flow. And I think
Right.
it's very different. It took me a while to start speaking freely, if you will, because having done you and I've
Mhm.
both done heaps and heaps, mountains of writing over the years, and you're always doing all these things at once, right? You're thinking about how do I connect this paragraph to the next paragraph, and I initially started speaking into AI models the same way I would write, and it was stilted, and it wasn't there was no creative flow, and it was just hard. In fact, it was harder than typing because I couldn't see what I was saying. I couldn't go back and like look at everything. Um, so it was like flexing a different muscle when I finally learned to just let go and think of it as telling a story.
It's a mind shift I think a lot of people are going to have to go through because we're so accustomed, we've been trained for so many years on how we interact with these devices in a highly structured fashion. And yes, you click here, do this, write this. It's, even to this day, you go into the forums, it's expecting things a certain way. And it's not necessarily true. And I think the content that
Yeah.
comes out is just, I find a lot, again, I find it to be a lot better. And look, I'm sure there are times I need to sit down and focus and really collect my thoughts and put it down. But, how often that, coming up with something, I'll put on my AirPods, I'll go outside, I'll go for a walk, and I'll transcribe the conversation. Using I like Super Whisper, that's what I use, and I'll at the end say, "Hey, transcribe this," but also summarize it for me into some bullet points or whatever the prompt is that I give it, and then I go from there. But it saves so much time, and it comes out so much better.
Massive, massive time saver. And it really does change the whole creative process. Now, I have to admit, I have mixed feelings about this as an English minor and someone who does a lot of writing and cares
Hmm.
about good writing, and I'm a little bit of the um, grammar police sometimes. You do have to sort of change your mind shift and just focus on getting it all out there into a first draft, if you will. But
Right.
yeah, it's
Well,
it's
it's a
powerful.
change. It's a change.
Yeah.
But I'm like you. For years, and you and I have done massive volumes of writing in our career, and some of it, a lot of it's we've written ebooks and work like that, which requires a lot of thinking and proper grammar. And I have my strong grammar book someplace around here that I every once in a while go use. It's a mind shift, and but I think once you make that shift, you realize it is very powerful. That said, I'm losing some of my ability to actually do grammar anymore. But hey, I can't spell like I could spell anymore, and words that I used to be able to pull up it like nothing, and now I forget. But I think that comes through. But I find myself being more creative.
I want to go back in a few minutes to the point about maybe losing some of your grammar and your vocabulary, because that's yes, we should talk about that. But the thing
Yeah.
that really comes to mind when you say that is there a difference between the process we're describing, and maybe we should describe it a little bit more too, but between the process we're describing and what people think of as AI generated drivel? Because there clearly is way too much AI generated drivel in the world, right? We don't need,
Yes.
I hate the idea of someone saying, "Hey, write me an article about this," and they give like a 2 sentence description of the article and they just let an AI model generate it. I'm sorry, that's useless, it's lazy, and it's
100%.
not value creating work. We're not talking about that. Like I think you and I would both never
Oh, never did
put
that.
our name behind AI generated drivel. Um, how do you think this is different?
I think it's very different to take something that is a product of our brains. And we are sitting there, we're articulating whatever it is we're trying to describe in an enormous amount of detail. Maybe it's a chapter in a book, maybe it's something like that. But these are our thoughts. Now, I think where AI really comes in for you and me, not only the transcription part of it, which is obviously extraordinarily helpful, it's organizing our thoughts. And to me, that's a big time saver. Taking those thoughts that we've put down, or we've articulated, we've transcribed, it's still our content. I'm not asking AI to go out and write me something. I'm asking it to take what I've created and just organize it for me. And then I can take it and I can go over it again and reorganize it one more time manually. That's a big time saver.
I think that's also a huge distinction. It is still your content. In fact, what I've noticed is I create more content, more volume when I'm working this way than when I
Yes.
was writing. I was
Yes.
working on a report the other day, and I did a series of I set up a document and I asked a model to ask me questions about different topics that I'd fed in, and each answer I gave was 8, 9, up to maybe 14 or 15 minutes of me talking. And the
Right.
word count that I generated, now, obviously, some of it was repetitive, I'm sure, right? Like I was just talking and telling stories, but I generated a larger volume of content that way, which was then helpful because I was able to condense it with the help of AI and doing some editing. But I got I got more of my thoughts out than if I were typing because it's
Yes.
just more
Yes.
fluid.
It's a lot more fluid. It's a lot more stream of conscious. And I find, so you're doing that, and I'm also writing an article. And here I am sitting there. The prompt that I put in, I said, look, I want you to act like a certain author, and I want you to ask me questions in this fashion. And then I will take my first draft, it'll organize it. And then I said, at the end of that draft, I want you to ask me questions like you're a journalist and pepper me with tons of questions. And I find that I go back and forth. And now having this, it's a lot more fluid, more natural. I can respond doing what you're doing where I'm speaking and then I'm transcribing it. I'm sitting there typing it still, but my typing is just a lot more. It's a stream of conscious typing. I'm not worrying about grammar as much. I'm not worried about certain misspellings and organization. But it'll then take that and it'll organize it better. But I get a lot more volume out of
Yeah.
myself when I do it this way. A lot more volume.
Really interesting. And just because I'm sure that hopefully some people will want to try this. I mean, you mentioned a tool that we both love and use, Super Whisper.
Yeah.
It's a, I love it because it lets you create your own sort of prompts and instructions for what to
Yeah.
do with the text that you speak, and you can download the models and have them run on your own machine, which is great from a privacy perspective. I love Super Whisper too. Um, the other thing I've been using a lot is voicenotes.ai. Um,
Right. You like that.
Very similar to Super Whisper. I like that a lot. Yeah. What else? Anything else that you use and like?
Those are the ones I always use Super Whisper. I love that. I think when I sit down and I write, I've tried all the models in some capacity or another, whether it's, ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini or Claude. They all have their pros and their cons, and depending on what I'm doing, I might use a different one. But I tend to use all of those. To me, a lot of it's making sure that the prompt is, properly structured to get the output that I want. Some organize my thoughts better. I make it easy to organize projects better than others. But all I think powerful in their own ways. But I love Super Whisper to me, and we're not getting paid for this. They don't even know we're talking about them. It is an incredibly powerful tool that I find indispensable for even recording meetings, and not even just my thoughts, but just recording meetings we're on them and having the transcription immediately available.
Yeah. And then to be clear, these help gather transcriptions that help organize the thoughts, but then there's still a lot of writing to do. And you can use other models to help fine tune your writing.
Right.
I actually discovered another application I like called Lex.page, Lex, and it is
Right. You like
really,
that.
yeah, it's great. It's a long form writing environment powered by AI, and it lets you do all sorts of version control, and it has built in prompts that do that act like an editor, and you can
Okay.
obviously create your own prompts. So I think it's, there's a lot of tools out there. These are by no means the only ones, but um, yeah,
But
I think so. Voice is a big thing.
yeah, and I think this goes back to what we're discussing. It's how the interaction between the human and machine is changing dramatically. Clearly, voice is a big part of this. But one thing that we kind of glossed over, I didn't gloss over and touch on it yet. I think it's not yet there, but not far behind either. It's just the multimodal aspect of this. When at some point you can start identifying, or you can even do some of this today, looking at emotions on faces and those types of things are going to have an enormous even because remember we're humans, we communicate through facial expressions and through our voice, and now being able to communicate with a machine in the same way is
Huge.
immensely powerful.
Huge. In fact, it's funny because like one very simple version of that is I don't know if it'll work right now, but in a lot of software, you do this and there, right? I gave a thumbs up.
Right.
So there's a little bit of AI right there analyzing the image that it's getting and taking cues from my body language. Um, but the other cool thing is we talk about voice as the input mechanism. How much do you use voice as the output mechanism where you listen to content instead of reading it on your monitor? Do you do that? Do you use
I don't do that.
NotebookLM's podcast?
No, honestly I don't. Well, I'll listen to podcasts, or I will listen to podcasts, and I've done Notebook LM to take some of the output from big documents and put it into podcast structure. I tend not to, only because I find that I read fast. So for me, it's not been, and I find listening to content actually slows me down. It's just a preference. But like you said, Notebook LM, I've taken 200-page PDFs and I've thrown it into Notebook LM, and I said summarize this for me and get a 45-minute output. Well, that's actually nice, especially for your
Yes.
car.
Yeah. Well, that's what I find I really like about it is it extends my working hours in a very painless way. If I'm
Yes.
tired of reading or I have to go wash the dishes or I want to go for a hike or whatever, I can take any topic and convert it to a
Yeah.
podcast or some other form of audio briefing and just listen to it while I'm doing something else.
Yeah.
In fact, you're better at digesting those 200-page research papers than I am. What I often do is I'll first generate a 20 or 30-minute um, pod style review of the paper, use that as my first pass, and then go back and try to read it. Um, because it's less overwhelming
Works.
than trying to
Yeah.
dive into some dense, yeah. But
No, I
I think,
agree.
yeah. So yeah, we really are in a Star Trek age, right? Where we're
We
speaking
are.
and listening to our machines.
Yeah, no, and I think it's funny because this, I think, dovetails or walks into accessibility for those that are disabled. And it really gives them access to information that previously was extraordinarily difficult for them to get access to. And you're in a new world because the previous generation of text to voice or voice to text honestly was mediocre at best. On a good day in a controlled environment with a very specific, language that you're talking, a domain that you were working in. But these tools are now general purpose, almost as good as interacting with another human, and that just changes, I think, things in a way that are incredibly dramatic, especially for a disabled person. Maybe you can only interact with your eyes and your eyelids and other facial, tiny facial expressions, which can now be picked up by a multimodal model and then transcribe that or transfer that to a language that other people can actually understand. And that is
Totally.
science fiction.
And it also just supports people with different learning styles, right? Like there are days when
Yes.
I want to just sit quietly and read something. There's other days when I want to listen to it. And so it just sort of lets you ingest information in the way that works for you.
Right.
Super
Right.
powerful.
Right. And you
So
and I have spoken
let's
about that in the past. Let's go to the next. Yeah. Let's move on. We'll keep
Yeah,
going.
no, let's talk about like you said, multimodal. So let's talk about like what's next beyond voice, video, and maybe the place to start is what we did for
I was,
RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic, and maybe
yeah.
you can start off describing that because that was a
Well,
fun experiment for us.
that was a great experiment for us, and where we started and where we wound up are two completely different places. So, for those who don't know, David and I did a graduate level class at RPI on generative AI for leaders. For those that are senior, looking to learn how artificial intelligence and generative AI can be used in their business. And we went pretty deep. It was a deep class. So, the whole thought process, because it is a lot of videos for roughly a 7-week class. So, you're talking about maybe 30 to 40 hours of video that we had to record. So we start this process of going through recording all these videos, and we sat in the studio
Yeah,
and I think after like 3 hours of doing this, we were ready to
It was
shoot
exhausting.
ourselves. It
Yeah.
was exhausting.
Yeah.
We were both wiped out, and it's like this isn't going to work. So
And there was
David,
a lot of editing needed on the back end of that.
it was
So,
so time intensive. It was obviously not going to work out, and plus the content's changing fast, and we were finding we
yeah.
had to change the content often, and it just
Yeah.
wasn't working. And you came up with this. It was a brilliant idea, and when you tried it, I was like, "This is just the way." Which was we basically record ourselves using one of the tools out there, and we used I forget which one was actually used. We used
Well, we used HeyGen to generate the
HeyGen,
video.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we used Super Whisper to record us speaking to slides. So we wrote all the slides, we designed all the slides, and then we sat there and we recorded our voices as if we were a teacher teaching to the slides. So that was all there. Then we created an avatar using HeyGen, which was just you create a 1 minute video of yourself speaking to the camera, and then it takes our language that we had recorded and it maps it to our face and it creates a video avatar of us speaking on top of the content. And if we change the content, it's just a matter of regenerating the avatar, which takes an hour or two, but it's nothing big. And it worked out fantastic. So now you see us talking to a presentation, and that's all AI generated.
The only downside is people might wonder why I wore the same shirt for 7 weeks straight because we didn't
You
think
and
to
I both.
generate different avatars with different clothes on. Um,
Yes. Now you say
but
that, I never thought of that.
but you're right. It was incredibly effective for us because with content that was changing all the time, we could go back, edit the slide if we needed to, edit the script, insert some new parts, whatever we need to do, and just regenerate the video. And it was good, high quality video. The other thing that really stuck with me about that is we were able to create content that was far easier for the class participants to consume than if it had been hundreds of pages of writing. And what that
Yes.
meant was when we had our weekly class sessions, we spent time on engaging discussions, not lecturing from a book, not giving them the
Right.
material. They
Right.
watched the videos. And then we had these really engaging discussions. And very rarely did they come in and say and ask us about something in the video. Like they asked about what it meant. They asked about the implications. They asked about what's possible. So that told me that they actually got a lot of, they absorbed a lot of content and knowledge from those videos. So I think it was effective for the class participants as well.
So now you bring up a really good point now, and how would this change learning? Because the traditional model of a teacher in front of a class, or even just watching a video, where we did a hybrid approach, and like you said, when we spoke to them, it was a different, it was an entirely different approach. The questions were different, and I think I found that they got a lot more out of that interaction because they came already, I don't say educated, but they came with a lot of knowledge into these
Yeah.
conversations,
Yeah.
and it
Well,
made a
this
big
is this
difference.
is something that college professors have been doing for a few years too, and I think I'm certainly not an expert in this field, but a lot of this gained popularity during COVID, and it was professors who were using some vehicle to record their lectures, and maybe it was just a webcam and making a live stream recording, but the important part was then they spent the live interaction time with their students actually having meaningful discussions, not delivering content. And that's so much more powerful.
Oh, it's you're going through the information for a second time, so it's just getting reinforced that much more strongly. I think you walk away with a deeper, much deeper understanding than you would otherwise. And I think this just illustrates these tools and how powerful they've become, and they're really kind of changing how you interact with machines, just in general. And we saw that. We saw that in obviously these real cases where it just made a tremendous difference.
Yeah. So I think what'll be next then is, we've talked about speaking to AI, listening to AI. What'll be really interesting is, well, and obviously we can have back and forth conversations. There's any number of different AI assistant models that you can have. These days, very rich back and forth conversations. You can interrupt. You can cut them off with a new question. I think we're going to very soon see a um, multimodal version of that where I'll be able to talk to the Peter Memon avatar, and that
Yeah,
avatar will know everything you know. It'll speak the way you speak, and we can have a conversation.
right. I don't think that's, I mean, look, I think if you and I sat down for a day, we can figure out how to do that now with tools being
Uh,
as powerful.
oh,
It's especially in our case where there's so much of us recorded already. So there's a lot of our voice, there's a lot of our just, everything is transcribed, obviously. All these YouTube videos are transcribed. Um, so now taking it and mapping into, and HeyGen's gotten much more powerful, as have some of the other ones that are out there. And it's amazing. So there's nothing stopping us from making interactive Peter and David that is, a fake Peter and David. I think we should
the
try that.
tools are there. It all comes down to, and this won't be surprising, it all comes down to the data and the content, right? Which is
Yes, always does.
what what has made it possible for us to do some of the things we have done is having thousands of hours, maybe not thousands, but many hundreds of hours of content, thousands of pages of writings, things that you and I have done that is all addressable data now that we can use in an AI model. And that's really the name of the game. Um,
Yeah, yes, exactly. So all this unstructured content you and I have generated over the past year and a half is now usable in ways that we never would have envisioned before.
Huge. Yeah, really interesting. And so I think, it's funny because everyone made jokes in the beginning of our RPI course about, oh, it's hard to tell if that was really David or his avatar. Um, and we laughed and we were like, oh, that is funny. But then you start thinking, to some degree, how much does it matter? In other words, if there is if I'm talking to an avatar that looks like me, or if someone's talking to an avatar that looks like me, and it's just powered by the same AI engine that sits behind every model, then I'm not going to feel like I talked to David. I'm going to feel kind of ripped off. Um, but if you're talking to an avatar that is based on content that that person has said, that acts like that person, um, I'll say thinks in air quotes because we know these models don't actually think, but behaves like that person. Um, that starts to the distinction between the real person and the avatar of that person gets less important. I won't say there's not no distinction, but it's maybe less important than we might typically think it is. I don't
Yeah,
know. Do you
no, I
agree
agree.
with that?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with that. I think I agree with that. I have another thought too, and it's turning on my head as you're speaking over here. Back to the presentations that we did at RPI. Do you think if it was just a presentation and a voice without the avatar, would they have gotten as much out of it as possible? So we're
I do not think so. I think that humans being humans, I mean, look, there are times when I listen to podcasts, and there's times when I watch videos on YouTube. There are people who watch this podcast on YouTube because it's more interesting to them or more stimulating to see my smiling face and whatever, and
right.
your wise hand gestures. And there's other people other times who just want to hear the audio. So, but I think generally having that choice is a really good thing. And I think there's going to be topics and people and situations in which it's far more meaningful to have a video, even if it's an avatar, even if it's an AI generated video, as long as it's relevant to what you're doing. I think it adds a whole more powerful dimension to it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it would be more
I don't know.
powerful when you can have a two-way interaction and it can ascertain your facial, if he's bored or, it starts reading your facial movements or wait, and you raise a hand and such. That's going to be, which is again, not far away if it's, not already there.
Not far away. No, I think you're right, and I think the use cases for this are profound. I mean, the obvious ones that everyone thinks of are, customer service and sales and other B2C type roles, right? Where you could have a voice or a video avatar providing first line customer support, and um, great. I think that's it's happening today. It's very doable, but I think as we continue to progress, we're going to see this move into a lot of other types of use cases.
Oh, yes.
Education is one we just talked about. Healthcare could be one. I mean, who
Huge one.
knows? There's,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
I
Um,
think, I mean, you think about it that way, and just taking it a step further, as these machines learn about us as individuals, they learn my preferences, they learn how I speak and how I learn and how I listen and the types of voices I like to listen to, what's soothing, what's not. It's not a stretch for have a avatar doctor, so to say, that is, having a hard conversation with me in a a voice that maybe is more amenable to delivering certain types of news. Or that's not a stretch at all to do that.
And look, the things that you and I have already done include, like, when I write reports for clients, I start with an outline of all the important things I know we need to cover, the
Right.
topics. I don't put the facts in. I just say we need to talk about this and this and this and this. And the last time I did it was probably a 3-page outline with 200 items in it. What I like is that you can get models to ask you about those things, and they can even ask follow-up questions. They can say more about this, or, oh, you forgot to mention this, right? So I could easily see a medical assistant avatar asking follow-up questions in a way that is very powerful. And then, at the end of the day, I still would prefer a real human in the loop to make a diagnosis or a
Of course.
recommendation or whatever. But it's a very it's a cost-effective way to elicit information from someone. I felt like I was being interviewed by a model that I created, and it was really a cool
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And the
Yeah.
same with the stuff I'm doing. I feel like it's just amazing oddly enough, it gets a lot out of me.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah, it does.
it's amazing.
So, but we've been talking about, direct human to machine interaction. The
Right.
other interaction change that I hadn't even planned on talking about this because it just came to me as we were talking is there's also a new interaction model that is the non-interaction model. And what I mean by that is the agentic model, which is where you
Oh,
can
yeah.
stand up agents, AI agents, that are going to react to stimulus and go and do something and complete a task.
Yes.
And you're not even directly interacting with them. Once you launch the agent will sit there in perpetuity waiting to be kicked into life by a command you give, a word you say, a document you put in a certain location, an event that it detects or whatever. And then it goes off and solves a problem, does a task, whatever it is, and then comes back to you with information. So that was kind of like, what do you think about that? That interaction style? Does
I
it
have a
qualify
whole,
as an interaction?
no,
Like
it
it's kind of a
does.
non-interaction.
It's an interaction. It does.
Yeah.
I'm trying to wrap my head. I mean, I wrap my head's not the problem. It's trying to articulate how I feel about that, which I'm not 100% sure. I like it theoretically. I think it would be great to have a series of little Peter agents running around doing things that I otherwise would have to do myself. I mean, it would make life a lot easier for me. I am not sure. And you bring up a good question. How do you interact with those agents? Because that actually goes down a whole nother rabbit hole of how do I interact with these tools. I like that thought. I don't know how I feel about having these little agents. Though at some point I'm sure we'll all be using them extensively. Um, you got me in that one. I'm a little bit stumped
I,
there.
I'm I was
Here's my
playing
feel.
around with a very, very simple one, and this is a very simple example, but I think you also use a service called Readwise, which I love because it
Love.
lets me highlight text in things I'm reading on an iPad, a
Yep.
Kindle, an iPhone, a web browser, wherever I want. I can highlight
Use it
text,
every
like
day.
things I want to save. Yep, it's fantastic. So I have thousands and thousands of highlights built up, and you can go into
Yep.
the Readwise interface and you can search for things. I actually now I'm working on two agents. They have just released a beta version of an MCP server,
Oh,
and
really?
yes, and it's really cool.
Interesting.
I have it working right now that I can go into. I think I have it set up on Claude, and I can ask a question. And as long as I use the word highlights, it seems to know I want to. It seems to realize it should
I
interact with
have
the
to.
MCP server.
Oh, I love that. I
And
got to do that.
it's amazing. So the thing I'm trying to set up is I want an agent to just say every Friday to write me a summary of the things I saved this week,
I
right?
love that
To come
idea.
back and say, hey, here are the things that you found worth saving this week. And that would be an
Gotcha.
agent that would just react to whatever I saved and
Yeah.
on its own maybe send me an email. I haven't decided I haven't gotten working yet, but and I'm not sure exactly what format it'll be. Maybe just a short email like, hey, these are the
Yeah.
these are the things you saved this week, and maybe some summarization of them or something. I don't know.
I love that idea. Well, it's funny because I've been thinking in the background too, creating an agent that would just go out and troll certain news sites that I like to read and give me a daily update, which is not hard, arguably. It's easy
Great.
to do.
Right.
But I love
And
the
and then
Readwise one. I love.
Yeah, and in the workplace, I mean, one of the things that you see, like we were obviously one of our clients is a large financial services institution, and so much of banking at a global large bank level, it's frightening how much of it really comes down to people get data, get pieces of paper or applications or forms or whatever, and
I
they
know.
do a whole lot of research, they do a whole lot of double checking, they do a whole lot of information retrieval, they synthesize things, and then they produce something. And it can be
Yep.
a credit report, it could be a KYC analysis, it could be a risk analysis.
Massive
This
amounts.
this meta pattern exists everywhere.
Hmm.
And there's so many potentials to just set up an agent that would go and wait for the credit application to appear in an inbox somewhere, and it would go off and do the work and then come back to the human and say, all right, I've done the upfront preparatory work for you. Here's what you need to do the value add part of the job. So that's,
Yes.
maybe I'm stretching it, but that feels like a form of human
No.
computer interaction to me.
100%. I think that model, that methodology, that's going to be all over the place because I agree. I think there's so much work that gets done is just the aggregation of pulling together information and then reporting back to somebody. Whether it's analytics, it's equity research, it's what are you doing? You're aggregating information. You're taking your view of based on your education, your knowledge of the world, and you're applying your pattern recognition to all this information and generating an output. Instead, you have these tools that are going to do something for you. And yes, you're interacting with them, and how you maybe you interact them with voice or however we
So
say.
interesting question, because we've sort of approached this from the angle of different forms of interaction replacing our direct interaction with the machine, with the computer. But what you're describing is often, some of that upfront data gathering and compilation is maybe it's done by a junior analyst in the bank before they hand it to the more senior person to do the real analysis. And so in that case, the interaction is actually sort of, maybe you're interacting with the AI intern instead of the human intern. Like
Yes.
there's a displacement effect there, that your interaction is moving from human to machine to human sometimes.
So let's think about that. Just to bring up a good example of this. So if you're at a senior investment banker and you have your, I don't know, your coterie of junior investment bankers who spend, 100 hours a week writing decks, because pretty much what they do, um, and you're explaining it to them, I need this. How hard is it you for now to talk into your application? It says, I need a deck for the following. We're proposing a deal, and you have hundreds of decks that have been loaded into your models already, and it can go create one quickly for you.
Yeah, people are doing that all the time now, and it's a massive time saver. So I think, it's a good reminder for me to continuously sort of think broadly about what interaction even means, because it's much less constrained than it was in the past, when it was just one person to one computer interacting.
Right.
So
Right. I think you're right. The whole model, it's changing, and it's changing faster than I think we have. And it's funny because some of the things that we've spoken about months ago, I'm starting to see show up in articles now, how quickly things are changing, and even right down to, you know, looking at how you manage all this stuff. It's all changing very quickly. And there's not enough, most very few in a way of studies of how this is going to broadly impact organizations and individuals.
So I want to talk about the impact on individuals, because you brought that up early. There's one more example I just want to give you if I'm thinking very broadly about what constitutes interaction, and that is um, one of the meeting recording services we use that does recordings of video meetings and live transcription and things. It actually has, I think, a somewhat of a novel form of interaction, which is I can have it put two little indicators in the corner of my screen, and one of them is a red, yellow, green percentage number that says, what percentage of the meeting am I speaking? And
Oh, right. I think I've seen one of
it's
those. Yes.
very interesting, because
Yeah.
I've caught a couple of times where it comes up and says, hey, you've been speaking 46% of the time. And it's just a nice little cue to say, all right, I gotta like wrap it up and let someone else talk, or listen to the person more than I speak. And the other thing it does is it gives me a monologue warning, and it's, you can set it to whatever time frame you want, but if you're talking more than say 90 seconds, it starts flashing up a little warning saying, hey, are you monologuing? Should you should you stop, take a breath, and let someone else talk? So um, that's an interesting form of interaction, because it's real-time feedback.
It is, and we're not normally used to that. I mean, you beg, see, as you're bringing up an interesting topic though, and this is a whole topic in and of itself. Is these models are trained obviously on a large corpus of information, and they obviously can count if because they have through voice recognition, they know if you're speaking, and they can. But when should they or should they? Because you're starting to get into an interesting psychological domain. It's like certain things we do as humans in certain ways we respond to other people, we do out of courtesy for the person and their personality. And how much of that now do you want to automate away? Or should we automate it away? Should we talk about automating it away? Because the model is cold. It has no feelings. It has no emotions. It's going to tell you, hey, Peter, you've been speaking for 50 minutes. Maybe you should shut up. And, you're sitting in a room and, your other coworkers are thinking, we'll let Peter speak for a little bit longer, whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's just, that
That's
that that you know I'm sorry, God.
no, that's a great point. Is it's they can be very effective, but they're not going to have the same emotive capability that humans have. And it's weird because we already have models that can perceive human emotions, right? It's the idea of
Right,
like a voice model that can alert a customer service agent, for example, when there's signs of stress or anger on the part of the
right.
customer they're talking to. That's been around for a while. But but most of the time models don't particularly do a good job at emoting back to us and giving us the same warmth of the warmth that you get through a human interaction,
No,
which
and
I'm
then there is
okay
so
with that.
I am. I think there are. Yeah, I don't know if I want a model reading every one of my emotions and every facial
No, no.
response. And there's the whole analysis of the face. I think it's called facts, and they can read the subtle changes in the muscle structure of your face and denotes if you're this or that or whatever it may be. I don't know if I want that level of detail, but it's interesting how much. And part of it's how do we respond to these things? Because if you can interact with a machine as if you're speaking to a human, do you treat it like a human, or do you treat it like a human who can't have negative emotions to you? You start cursing at it. I
Right.
don't know. You've got a whole other. I just wonder how
Human,
that affects the psychology of an organization in general.
it's weird, right? Because like humans do. I mean, you probably see this all the time. People say please and thank you to AI models, and
All the
people
time.
give them encouragement. They're like, "Oh, that was a really good try, but could you do this?" And
Yes.
I don't know that that's really effective. And we talked about this once before, but like Sam Altman from OpenAI once said that, I think he was more joking than real, but he said that there's probably $10 million worth of compute being wasted every year just on
Thank you.
processing people saying please and thank you to models, right? Like,
I'm sure. Right.
it's kind of
Right.
funny. Human behavior is weird. Um,
Yes. Exactly. It's very
what
weird.
what what about the impact though? Let's wrap this with talking about the impact on the human brain, because you mentioned it earlier. I think you said something like, is all of this making us dumber or lazier or having some not so great effect on us? So let's jump
So,
into that.
so I think, and this is my current thinking on this, and I don't think it fundamentally changes human nature. I think humans are inherently many times just lazy. We like tools. We like tools to do things for us, which is why we have tools.
Yes.
Which is why
Yes.
mankind has always invented tools. It's because we want things that made easy for us. I think it takes effort uh, to not cognitively offload or outsource our brains to these things. And there are those that will never do it. And there are those that will just they were always lazy. They're still going to be lazy. Now you're giving them a tool to create something, but they're still lazy. And it's there was an article I think I shared with you in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago about how in certain aspects it's making some people dumber because they're offloading their brains. I think that is a very real possibility for a lot of people who don't like to do the mental work to accomplish something. And
Yes.
that's going to exist no matter what, though.
No, I think that's right. I think it's um, MIT also released a study on that, and they found that there were, they don't know whether these were temporary or permanent, but that there were effects on people in terms of if they over relied on AI, that it sort of decreased some of their critical thinking ability. It would be too broad to say it made them dumber, but it certainly had impacts on the way they thought. But your comment about like we are as humans, we are inherently lazy. I think that laziness is the other mother of invention. It's not just necessity, it's necessity and
Right.
laziness. Um,
Yes.
I remember when I was a kid and my dad got a new riding lawnmower. We had a big lawn, and I guess I was at the age where I could like mow the lawn. And you get a new tool and you want to use it for everything. So he got a new lawnmower, and every if he had asked me to like carry a bucket out to his horse barn out in the backyard.
He's a lawnmower.
Yeah, I would get the
Of
lawnmower,
course.
I would drive it to the house, I would hook the little trailer to it, I'd put the bucket of water in the back of the trailer, and I would drive it to the barn.
Yep.
And it just felt fun and
Of
easy,
course.
but it
Well,
actually took longer than if I just carried the bucket to the barn myself.
yeah.
Um,
It's
right.
just it's human nature. It's just I think there was a thing that popped up in the news. I don't know if you saw it. There was a student. I forget where he graduated. I want to say UCLA or one of those schools, and he then goes advertising. Oh, by the way, I got my entire degree using ChatGPT, and everybody was up in arms about this. Like he did all his homework, he did this, and whatever. Anyway, but at the end of the day, who's he fooling? He hasn't learned. He hasn't done the work to get the degree. To have the piece of paper doesn't mean squat. He hasn't done the actual hard work. So when he gets into the workforce, has he developed any of the necessary skills? You can't go through life using ChatGPT. You have to be able to actually do stuff. And that degree is worthless for him, and he hasn't done the work to actually educate himself. And I think that message still needs to get out. Yes, you can use these tools to do some of this heavy lifting for you, and that's great. That doesn't mean you check your brain and do nothing. That doesn't mean you don't do the work. You have to do the work.
No, you and I, a couple of years ago now, we sort of were using the term augmented or amplified intelligence. We didn't like
Right.
artificial, and we were saying like, hey,
Right.
used correctly, AI can amplify human intelligence. And I think this is this really rings true with me. Like we were talking the other day about people who sit down to a large language model and write a two-sentence prompt, a very short prompt. They get very generic and very low value output. Um, the people who I know who are getting the most value out of large language models often are writing very lengthy, very specific, and sometimes very prescriptive prompts. And, sometimes I'll spend an hour thinking about and writing down exactly what I want a model to do. And the thing is, you have to know what you're doing already in order to get the model to help you do that thing. If it was a topic I didn't know anything about, I couldn't write a 1 or 2 page prompt, a detailed prompt, and therefore I wouldn't get the same benefit. So these models cannot and should not replace human learning and intelligence and knowledge. They should amplify it, make it easier to access your knowledge, but they can't be a replacement for learning
No.
about the world.
No, and I think unfortunately, of course, some people fall into that trap in thinking you can replace them in their thinking. And I look at them and go, well, that means you're replaceable. Then why do I need you to do a job? If I can replace you with a model because you've done, you know what I'm saying? I think in some respects, it should up the bar on our capabilities and our education in order to get the maximum amount out of these models because they can augment us quite dramatically because they are loaded with all this information and we have to be able to get out of it. But you have to be smart enough to be able to get that information out in a relevant fashion. And for that, you can
I
be
think
educated.
there's a there's a big misconception that people fall into all the time, and that is thinking that the activity that you spend the most time on is the most important that you do.
Right. Yes.
And we were talking about like AI is just tools, and people change their relationship to tools all the time. And I remember another silly story, but I remember in the olden days, right before pneumatic nail guns, carpenters spent a lot of time hammering in nails, right? And a good carpenter still
Yep.
might need 3 or 4 hammer strokes to drive in a 10 penny nail or a framing
Yep.
nail. And that was a lot of time. And I think to some degree, it was easy to think, well, the value of a good carpenter is they hammer nails, and a really good carpenter can hammer nails faster than a bad carpenter. And you started thinking that nailing things together was the value the carpenter was bringing. And all of a sudden you show up with pneumatic nail guns, and they're everywhere now. Now they're cordless. They're not even pneumatic. Some are like battery powered,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And what becomes very apparent is even though these carpenters spent a lot of time nailing things together, that wasn't their value. Their value was how they solved a problem, how they measured things, how they designed things, how they came up with a solution on how to frame this doorway when it wasn't
Hmm.
exactly, when the pipe run wasn't where I thought it would be. And so I look at AI, we're in the pneumatic nail gun phase of AI, right? Which is like, oh, we have these tools. And you think that they're doing everything for you, but eventually we'll realize no, the value is not
The person.
the content you generate with AI, it's the questions you ask, it's what you do with the content, it's the
Right.
human. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
Could not have said it better. You're 100% spot on. I agree with you 110%. And what's the old adage? A fool with a tool is still a fool. And it just holds true today.
it doesn't matter whether it's a nail gun or an AI model, right?
You're still a fool.
Yeah.
If you don't use it the right way,
Yep.
you're still a fool. And it doesn't
Yep.
make, if anything, if you're a fool with a tool and you're using it as a fool, all it's going to do is amplify your foolishness.
Well, so actually there's one of the downsides that occurs to me because I'm not a carpenter. You're a pretty good woodworker. I am not a woodworker. um and yet I could go out and buy or rent a nail gun and I could start hammering things together like nobody's
No
business, right?
way.
I could nail things together, and you know what, it would be a disaster. But
Yes.
there's another parallel there. Like there's a parallel, and we see this happening right now with things like vibe coding, which is you can you can have a large language model write code for you. But if you don't have a very good, you said early on that like it's your business analysis skills that are more important than your coding skills. If you don't understand the problem, know how to solve the problem, and have a good, strong understanding of solution architecture, having a model write the code for you is going to be lots of code that's still a really bad solution to a problem or a bad technical architecture. So
100%.
yeah,
Again, a full tool is still full. Because you can use these AI coding tools to come up with a solution doesn't mean it's a good solution, doesn't mean it's the right solution, and it doesn't mean it's going to be one that is you're ever going to want to put into production. And you and I have seen bad code, and we know it's somebody who can't think in a certain way what they can do. It's again, I think it just accelerates some of the badness that we get created.
yeah, it does. Would you ever, question for you, would you ever foresee licensing or certifying people to use models, having models that you're only allowed to use if you have demonstrated some level of, I don't know, knowledge, proficiency, or care?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, actually. Yes, I can
Yeah.
see that. I can certainly see that they, in certain domains where you literally need to be trained on the use of that tool and have that level of expertise to get the most out of it. And I can think of a lot of domains where that would certainly apply. Um, Medicine, engineering being two of them off the top of my head, legal possibly. But yes, and you have to be fully uh, trained or certified to use. I could certainly see that. That's an interesting point. I never thought of it that way, but that's a very interesting point. But why would that not be the case? When you say it, it almost seems obvious that you would want to do something like that.
I mean, you need a license to drive a car, but then again, you don't need a license to hammer nails into wood, um, and a lot of other things. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's interesting. Interesting
interesting
question.
thought. Interesting thought
Yeah,
for the day. Yes.
yeah.
Well,
Well, I'm going to go study for my large language model licensing exam.
you go do that. I'm going to go find myself something to drink.
All
Even
right.
though it's only Monday.
Hey,
Yes.
it's Monday when we're recording this, but every day is Friday when you're having as much fun as we are. So,
Yes,
um,
exactly.
Peter, this is the fun topic, and
Yes.
the fun part is we thought of a bunch of things we could talk about. We got about halfway through the list, so let's try to
Right.
revisit this topic in a future episode and talk a little bit more about you know the impact this has on what intelligence really means and you know what the value
Yeah.
of humans is. And
No, I think you're right. And I think you and I like to speak about these topics that I think are not spoken about nearly as much and the longer term implications and not focus on the nuances or the details of the various models that are out there, but the broader, deeper implications of this technology. And anybody out there, you have questions, again, I will say every episode, please feel free to reach out to us. Please subscribe. We love questions. We love to hear your thoughts.
yeah, I would especially love to know if there's anyone out there who worries that using AI is making them less intelligent, or are you worried about the effect
Yeah.
on your kids or younger generations in general? Like, what's going to happen. That's a great topic. I'd love to hear some people's thoughts on that.
That's an awesome topic. I would love to have a conversation about that. I think that's highly relevant, and I think something a lot of parents are certainly thinking about.
Oh yeah, yeah, no doubt,
Absolutely.
no
Well,
doubt.
David, it's been an absolute pleasure as always, and I look forward to our next one.
It's been a fun time on Call Me Data, and I'll talk to you
Yeah.
soon, Peter.
All
Take
right,
care.
David, you take care. Have a
All
great
right.
night.
All right.
All right,
Bye
bye
bye.
now.
Thanks for watching Call Me Data. If you enjoyed our podcast, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to us on YouTube. And make sure to stay up to date with us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.